Koi lucky Buff+Billion treasure space. As soon as you cross, the beginning is thunderstrike. What's going on in this leaky room? What's wrong with this window with a big hole broken? Also, what's wrong with the table with fewer arms and legs in the middle of this room? Gu Sangyu was greatly shocked. She must be dreaming. For a long time, she accepted this fact, well, who made her unlucky and died in a car accident. However, her grand and versatile master has now become a 3-year-old baby, but it's okay, it's not a big problem. Fortunately, the conditions were not good, so she relied on the strength of the big shot to make up for it. But what and what? Do you say Gu's father is paralyzed? It's okay, Xiaoyubao can treat it. What and what? You said the beautiful lady cried blind. It's okay, Xiaoyubao can treat it. What and what? Big brother is 9 years old, second brother is 7 years old, and third brother is only 5 years old, and third brother has congenital insufficiency due to premature birth. Xiaoyubao pouted and waved his small hand. It's okay, it's not a big problem, Xiaoyubao can treat it. Although Gu Dalao is a 3-year-old little girl treasure, she is not panicked in the face of things due to the lucky luck buff of Koi and the space bonus of billions of treasures. Let's see how Xiaoyubao flipped and roamed in ancient times. Brother Gu, brother Gu, brother Gu. What if there are wolf cubs coming to pick up their little Yubao? It's okay, call back. Their sister is unique and beautiful. Keywords of the novel. Koi to the farmhouse. Yubao has space without pop-ups, Koi to the farmhouse. Yubao has space. TXT complete collection download, Koi to the farmhouse. Yubao has space. Latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Crossing. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 2. Xiaoyubao wakes up. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Xiaoyubao wakes up. Mrs. Gu saw that her father couldn't work anymore, so she advised her weak but still earning some money mother. Tan Yue herself had a very gentle temperament, and Mrs. Gu's unreasonable and shrewd personality was beyond Tan Yue's control. Just because of Mrs. Gu's rubbing, the beautiful mother's eyes became blind, and her father was paralyzed in bed and unable to move. From then on, Mrs. Gu was completely unable to see Mr. Gu's family. She immediately contacted Li Zheng as a witness, and both parties signed a document to sever their relationship. Li Zheng knew that Mrs. Gu was not something, but he didn't expect it to be so. Li Zheng didn't want to waste time with such an unreasonable old lady, but instead looked sympathetically at her father, who was completely heartbroken. He didn't know why, but no matter what he did, he couldn't get Mrs. Gu's favor. Now that they were useless, he kicked them away. Gu's father was completely disheartened and signed the document to sever ties. From then on, the old lady of the Gu family and Gu's family were cut off completely. Not to mention that, Mrs. Gu asked her father to leave the house clean, meaning she couldn't take anything from the house. Gu's father's face turned even whiter. He was honest and knew there was nothing he could do, so he nodded and agreed. However, Gu's father also told himself that from then on, there would be no further involvement, whether it was life or death, good or bad, and there would be no more involvement. As soon as this incident occurred, everyone in the village scolded Mrs. Gu for her lack of conscience. Her eldest son was so kind to her that he lost such a useless little son. He even set his heart to sever ties with his eldest son. It's true that everyone has their own. Gu Mingchao's family was paralyzed, blind, and had 4 little puddings. The eldest son was only 9 years old, the second son was only 7 years old, the youngest son was only 5 years old, and there was also a silly girl who was only 3 years old. The village chief couldn't bear to see it and gave them the old house near the back mountain, which had been in disrepair for a long time. That old house itself is under the name of the village chief. Poor Mr. Gu's family, the village chief worked hard to complete the transfer documents and everything. Mr. Gu didn't know what to say to the village chief, but he knew that he was a good person. If he got up in the future, he must repay the village chief. If it weren't for the village chief's willingness to lend them a helping hand, they would really have nowhere to go. After dividing the family, Gu's father sent Gu Sangyu to secretly hide the only 5 taels of silver that had not been searched by old lady Gu and give it to the village chief, which was considered as money for buying a house. The house is considered to be bought, but it is already very dilapidated. 5 taels of silver is enough, but the village chief's running around is not well received. Now let's not talk about returning favors, it's all about survival. Thinking of Gu Mingqiao, he never owed anyone anything on credit, but now he owes the village chief's favor and I don't know if he can repay it. Gu's heart sank deeper and he said to the village chief, "Uncle Li, I owe you something. I don't know how I can repay it. If there is still a chance in this life, Gu Mingqiao will repay it on his own." If so, Gu Mingqiao continued, there is no chance in this life. In the next life, Gu Mingqiao will repay Uncle Li with a customized ox and horse. The village chief also felt sorry for Mr. Gu's family, who made Lu Tsuihua not a good thing. The village chief took a puff of dry smoke, and his eyes were filled with sympathy and helplessness. He sighed, "Mr. Gu, Uncle doesn't want you to repay him. Uncle didn't do anything. You bought the house with money, and you have helped him a lot. Now that you are in trouble, how can Uncle ignore it and run errands to transfer the house to another household? It is appropriate. However, in order to prevent the mother and son of Lu Tsuihua from causing trouble for you, Uncle Li said to the public that it was Uncle Li who sent you. This is also the only thing Uncle Li can do for you." Gu Mingqiao's eyes turned red and he said, "Thank you, Uncle Li." Afterwards, the village chief also brought some unused furniture from his home, patted Gu's shoulder, and left without saying a word. After severing ties, the mother went blind, the father was paralyzed in bed, the younger sister was a little fool, and the youngest brother had been weak due to premature birth and had not been taken care of. The burden of the family suddenly fell on the older brother Gu Sangyu. Gu Sangyu's small body is currently supporting a group of people and finding a job in the town. Because Gu Sangyu is young, the labor leaders do not treat her as a person and give him all the dirty and tiring work, with the least amount of money. Gu Sangyu was very depressed, but he had no choice. The father at home needed to take medicine, and the weak third brother also needed to take medicine. The second brother at home also put down his books and went up the mountain every day to pick some wild vegetables on the outskirts to sell. When Gu Sangyu woke up, she knew the environment was not good, but she didn't expect it to be so bad. She is only 3 years old. She also has a body of broken gongs and pans that is not awesome. A strong soul can't take the body that is dragging her feet. This is a big thing. Moreover, she doesn't seem to be able to speak yet. Gu was once again shocked. No, she had to be able to speak, even if she couldn't pronounce clearly, she had to be able to speak. Her body hadn't spoken yet, but she came and definitely could. I hope this won't hold her back, Gu Sangyu recalled. It seemed like Gu's father was in the next room. Sigh. Just as Gu Sangyu was thinking about how to make the beautiful woman realize that she had woken up, the second brother walked in lightly. Gu Sanglu walked up to his mother and was about to speak when he noticed that his younger sister was staring at him with round and big eyes fixed on her. Moreover, she didn't look as dull as before, with a glimmer in her eyes. Gu Sanglu immediately widened his eyes, with a tender and thin face that could only see bones. The hint of scholarly elegance that he carried on his body disappeared completely. A pair of bright big eyes flickered with tears, and he grabbed his mother's sleeve. His small voice trembled uncontrollably, "Mother, mother, mother, sister, sister woke up, sister seems to be not foolish anymore." Tan Yue was immediately startled, tears welling up in her eyes. She trembled and reached out to touch her little daughter's side. Finally, she reached out to touch Xia Chuanzi's hand, and instinctively, Gu Sangyu hooked onto the beautiful lady's hand. Feeling the response from her daughter, Yue wept with joy and said, "It's good to wake up, it's good to wake up." Gu Sangyu looked at the excited expression of her second brother and beautiful mother, and worked hard to open her small mouth. Finally, she managed to hold back a few unclear words. "Cool, cool, no, cry." Yue was startled again, then shook her hands and touched the little girl's face, sobbing uncontrollably. Okay, my little Yubao is not foolish anymore, not foolish anymore." Sobbing, the crying of the beautiful woman woke up Gu Sangyu, who was asleep. The little baby boy sat up in a daze, not knowing what had happened. The originally lifeless eyes lit up suddenly when they saw their own sister wake up. They quickly leaned over and said, "Sister, you're awake. It's great. It's great." End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Sharing a bowl of brown rice paste. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Sharing a bowl of brown rice paste. As soon as the young boy came over, Gu Sangyu smelled the faint scent of medicine on his body. Looking at his brother's joyful expression, Gu Sangyu showed a big smile towards Gu Sangyu. Gu Sangyu saw his sister smile and immediately froze in place, his mind filled with her smiling at him. Gu Sangyu's beautiful eyes were also flooded with splashes of water. He leaned over and coaxed, "Xiaoyubao, call me brother, I am second brother." At this moment, Gu Sangyu also seemed to remember when he was asleep, he seemed to have heard his sister call his mother. Xiao Sangshu's eyes lit up immediately and he quickly leaned over, "Xiaoyubao, Xiaoyubao, I am the third brother." Gu Sangyu looked at the expectant eyes of her two brothers and tried to open her mouth, holding back a few words, 2, 3, 3. Saying these few words is exhausting for her, her body is really struggling. Gu Sanglu and Gu Sangshu exchanged a glance, their eyes filled with surprise. "My younger sister is not foolish anymore, she even called me brother." The beautiful lady couldn't see her 3 cubs on the side and kept wiping away her tears. It was so good, her little Yubao woke up. For a long time, Xiaoyubao's stomach rumbled in the empty room, and Gu Sangyu's little face immediately turned red. Gu Sanglu reacted and quickly said, "My sister is hungry. I'll go and bring her the batter." The beauty's mother quickly said, "Lure, hurry up. It's also her mother's fault. She's only focused on being happy and forgot that Xiaoyubao hasn't eaten for a day and a night." "Well, my mother, I'll be here soon." Gu Sangshu also wanted to help, but when he looked at his body, which was breathing every step, Xiao Sangshu sighed and lowered his head. He is the only one at home who is the least useful. In no time, Gu Sanglu walked in with a bowl of brown rice with several notches on the edge. Gu Sangyu eagerly looked at the bowl, pursed her lips lightly, and her temples twitched slightly. It was said that even a bowl was lifted up, and there were all notches around it, with no room for anyone to bite. Gu Sangyu thought to herself, if the bowl is broken, let it break a bit, as long as there is something to eat. However, as the bowl approached her, Gu Sangyu's eyes turned black. It was said to be a paste of brown rice, which was probably not much better than pig food. There were only a few pieces of brown rice inside, and the rest was some bran, which sank to the bottom of the bowl with a thin layer of white. This was probably the only food in the family. Gu Sangyu was completely eager to cry without tears, and let her eat something like this. Regardless of whether her small body could eat it, the first issue was the issue of sore throat. This, but who made her now the body of a 3-year-old baby or a broken gong pot body? Gu Sangyu watched as her second brother scooped up the soup from a small wooden spoon and fed it to her. Gu Sangyu blinked her clear and round big eyes. She could say she really didn't want to eat it, but if she didn't eat it, she might starve to death. At this moment, Gu Sangyu was torn between starving and eating. In the midst of the flames and lightning, Gu Sangyu made up her mind and finally had a chance to live again. If she died this time, there might not be such a good chance for her to live again. This rebirth journey itself is something that can be encountered but cannot be achieved. She should stick to it honestly, no matter what, as long as she lives, everything is possible. However, this thief gave her such a start from the beginning, especially when she was only 3 years old. This made her a big shot, but now she can only be a waste and a burden to her family. She, Gu Sangyu, and Gu Dalao have never been so suppressed before. Gu Sangyu let out a long sigh in her heart. This change in family affairs cannot be achieved overnight. Fortunately, what Gu Ergo scooped for her was all clear, without scooping the rice and bran underneath. Gu Sangyu smiled sweetly at her second brother and slowly drank half of the soup in the bowl with Gu Sangliu's hand. Then, the little girl stopped drinking and stuttered in front of Gu Sangliu's milky voice, saying, yes, no more, full. In fact, Gu Sangyu's stomach was almost convulsing, but there was only one thing left at home. Looking at the elderly, weak, women, and children at home, they were all sick, disabled, and frail, as if they were about to ascend to the sky in the next second. The rest, one by one, can still give everyone a chance to survive. So, at this moment, Gu Sangyu's small face was wrinkled, and a layer of mist filled her eyes, as if Gu Sanglu didn't agree to her, so she cried and showed him. Gu Sangyu struggled to hold back a few words from her throat. Yes, Liang Qin, Dad, eat, Yubao, full. Upon hearing these words, everyone's eyes turned red. Their little Yubao not only regained consciousness, but also showed concern for them. Tan Yue wiped her tears and touched in the direction of Xiao Sangyu, grabbing her hand. She choked up and said, "Your mother's Yubao, why are you so well behaved? You don't have to be so well behaved. It's all because your mother is useless," sobbing. Gu Sangyu looked at the haggard-looking beauty's mother crying uncontrollably, feeling extremely anxious. However, her small body couldn't move for a moment. Most of the ancient rural families were not doing well, not to mention that Gu's family had been rubbed and rubbed by that vicious old lady for so long, and everyone couldn't eat or dress well. From the scattered memories of Gu Sangyu's small body, it can be seen that she was only active in her room. The only time she left the village was when she followed her mother and father to the market. The children playing in groups in the village looked at her with mocking eyes. Although Xiao Gu Sangyu has a bad brain, it doesn't mean she can't distinguish the malice of others. Since then, Xiao Gu Sangyu has never left the house again. Xiao Gu Sangyu usually goes to bed after eating. Although she can also walk, most of the time she falls asleep. In addition, the food we usually eat is not good, lacking in nutrients, and our small body is even thinner, as if it can be blown away by a gust of wind. This fever lasted for so long that almost Gu Sangyu's small body disappeared. It wasn't until Gu Sangyu arrived that this small body officially began to function. The sickly and pale Gu Sangshu gradually moved to Gu Sangyu's side, leaned over his small, creamy face, and gently rubbed against Gu Sangyu's small face. With a hint of tears in his voice, he said, "Sister, brother is so useless. If brother grows up a little longer, he can go outside and earn money like big brother." Gu Sangyu looked at Gu Sangshu with his small head hanging low and his mouth pursed, and felt a pain in her heart. In modern times, children of this age should have acted carefree in their parents' arms. However, in such a world, under the rubbing and grinding of such a vicious old lady, their Gu family, from old to young, had no choice but to grow. Gu Sangyu struggled to lift her other small hand, grabbed the third brother's small hand, and used all her strength to pinch Gu Sangshu. Gu Sangshu felt the gentle and shallow force in his hand, and saw Xiaoyubao smiling sweetly at him, as if silently comforting him. Gu Sangshu's eyes turned red again. Her sister, such a good sister. Gu Sangliu's eyes were red as she watched the warm interaction between Xiaoyubao and her mother's 3 younger brothers, and she turned her back to wipe away her tears. Since they were kicked out, their family has been in disarray. If it weren't for the house that the village chief kindly sold them, their family would have nowhere to go. After coming here, although the house was dilapidated, it was also their home. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Gu's father cries. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Gu's father cries. Gu Sangyu's small face, which resembled a beautiful woman's mother, also had thin bones coming out. The whole family was thin and bony, and if they were well grown, they wouldn't know how many little girls would be mesmerized. Gu Sangyu's mouth curved a big curve, with a childish tone in his voice. He said to Tanyue, "Mother, if my sister wants us to eat, then we will eat. We all have to live. Now that my sister wakes up, our family will get better and better." Tanyue nodded, as if she had covered her beautiful eyes with a layer of black clouds and mist, and her tears welled up as she said, "Okay, listen to us, Luer. Our whole family will be fine." If Jur had known that Yubao had woken up, it would have been great. Jur would have been very happy too, but the mother Jur was still working far away in the town and couldn't come back, nor did she know how those people would treat her. Every time she came back, she would have touched Gu Sangyu's face and then touched Gu Sangyu's arm. However, every time her Jur came back, she lost a scent. Now, her jade has not returned for a long time, her jade. Tanyue's face was covered in tears, and Gu Sangyu looked at the beautiful lady's face, feeling heartbroken. At the same time, she became even more resentful of that malicious old lady. Her beautiful lady's mother was so fragile that she needed to be protected. However, now she is worried about her father, brother, and all of them, crying all the time. She thought, perhaps her mother's eyes are not only because of embroidery, but also because her mother keeps crying. Her mother is fragile but not weak. In ancient times, filial piety was highly valued. If it weren't for that old woman's frequent and indiscriminate speech, her mother wouldn't have been like this. It's also fortunate that they have separated now. That wicked woman has no relationship with them in the future. If they dare to bully her parents and brother again, she will definitely retaliate back. Gu Sangyu's eyes turned even redder as he sniffed and said, "Mom, big brother will come back, don't worry." Although Gu Sangyu said so, he didn't know what happened to big brother. Gu Sangyu stabilized his body and said, "Mom, there's still some brown rice left in the batter. You drink it quickly." Tanyue reached out his hand and tentatively touched it in the air. Gu Sangyu handed the bowl to Tanyue's hand, and Tanyue grabbed it. She knew that her family's lure was small, but her ideas were big and stubborn. If she didn't drink, it wasn't certain that this kid would do something. She also knows that if she falls down at home, she really doesn't have a backbone. Gu Dad, she can't count on it, she's already in a state of decline. Tanyue touched the edge of the bowl and finally found a slightly smaller edge without any notches. She leaned her mouth over and took a sip. The brown rice paste has already cooled down, but as long as there is enough food to eat, it is stronger than anything. Cooling down is better than nothing. Then, Tanyue smiled and handed the bowl over, but she couldn't see it and waited for Gu Sangyu to pick it up. Gu Sangyu took the bowl and handed it to his younger brother, saying, "Sure, drink quickly." Gu Sangyu took the bowl and took a sip, feeling cold. His small body trembled for a moment, his face turned even whiter, and he even pulled his throat. The little man frowned tightly. His body was also a burden on the family. If his mother had not been pushed away by her grandmother, Gu Sangyu's small face would have been stained with disgust and hatred. She was not his grandmother, and if it weren't for her, he would definitely not have been a burden on the family. He is already 5 years old. If he hadn't given birth prematurely, it wouldn't be like this now. A hint of pain flashed in Gu Sangyu's bright big eyes and he handed the bowl to his second brother. After taking a sip, Gu Sangyu said, "Mom, I'll go and deliver it to Dad." Tanyue sighed and said softly, "Luer, go ahead and tell your father that Yubao has woken up. Let him pick himself up. He is the head of the family and the backbone of the family. Tell him." Gu Sangyu nodded, feeling a sense of accomplishment in his heart. His father has always attached great importance to Yubao. If he knew that Yubao had woken up, he wouldn't have been foolish. Even if he couldn't regain his previous energy, he would have picked himself up and wouldn't be so depressed. Sure enough, after a while, the man in the house turned red when he heard his little daughter wake up, except for the village chief who was selling the house. This time, a suppressed and somewhat joyful wail came out of the house. Gu Mingchao's withered hands trembled as he lifted his eyelids and asked again, "Luer, did Yubao really wake up?" Gu Sangyu nodded and said as he took the bowl from his father's hand. He was afraid that his father would get excited and the only decent bowl in the family would fall. They don't have the money to buy a bowl. Yes, my sister woke up, and she's not stupid either. In just a few words, it triggered such a scene, and fortunately, their geographical location was sparsely populated, so Gu's crying voice did not scare others. Gu Sangyu looked at his father's appearance and became more energetic than before. As long as you have the essence and spirit, no matter what, there is also hope. For a long time, Gu's crying became louder and quieter, gradually losing his voice. At this moment, Gu's dark face turned red, which was truly embarrassing. He even cried so much in front of his son. But his Yubao woke up, which was the best news he had heard in such a long time, not one. Cry, just cry, it's not a loss. On the other hand, Tan Yuyue heard Gu's movements for the first time since they had an accident. Tan Yuyue's eyes turned red again and she kept murmuring, "It was really good." But Gu Sangyu, who was only 3 years old, couldn't hold on anymore and continued to sleep. Gu Sangyu stared eagerly at his sister's sleeping face, afraid that she wouldn't be able to fall asleep again like before. It wasn't until Gu's father burst into tears that he noticed her frown and immediately covered her ear. Seeing his younger sister's eyebrows furrow, Gu Sangyu also curved his lips. And Gu Sangyu, who was working in Mingbei town far away, felt a hint of warmth in her heart for some reason, as if something good had happened. Quickly, Gu Sangyu let out a bitter smile and said, "What good thing could happen? Their family is already broken and cannot be broken anymore." Many times, he couldn't hold on anymore, but when he thought of his parents, siblings who were starving for food, Gu Sangyu could only grit her teeth and continue to persevere. No matter how much the leader rubbed him, it didn't matter. As long as he was given money, what would his family do? Gu Sangyu's mouth was bitter. A day passes quickly. The next morning, Gu Sangyu was awakened from hunger. She struggled for a moment and found herself more agile than the previous day. She could already turn over. Then, Gu Sangyu saw the sleeping beauty in little Doubting's 3 brothers. She looked at the beautiful lady who frowned even when she was asleep, sighed in her heart, and turned to look at little Doubting's 3rd brother, only to find that she also frowned. Also, the current situation at home is really difficult to endure. But she is really hungry. Gu Sangyu pursed her mouth and gently rubbed her stomach with her small hand, attempting to make herself feel better. Gu Sangyu blinked her eyes, not knowing where her second brother had gone. She turned her head and looked at the leaking door. She remembered that her second brother was originally going to town with her eldest brother, but he was too young and they didn't want him. So, the older brother stayed in the town to work, while the second brother usually goes up the back mountain to dig some wild vegetables outside and then sells them in the town. Alas, this family is really going through a lot of difficulties, even more so. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. The Explosion of Gold Fingers. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. The explosion of gold fingers. Just as Gu Sangyu was about to faint from hunger, she suddenly realized that the scene in front of her had changed. Gu Sangyu rubbed her eyes in disbelief, and it was indeed a change. Many chickens, many ducks, many geese, and rabbits. Where is this? Isn't she on the Kong of the Gu family? Did you cross over again? No, everything here seems to be stationary, but it doesn't seem to be. Gu Sangyu instinctively walked forward. Wait, she can actually walk now. And why does the air here feel so refreshing? Gu Sangyu suddenly thought of something. In modern times, although she was a big shot, she also loved some romance novels, and she basically flipped through all the major novels. Based on the situation here, it's probably her space. Gu Sangyu suddenly became excited. Since it was a golden finger given to her, it was hers. God saw her tragic death and treated her well. She said that in modern times, she was known as a koi, and it's not for nothing. In modern times, when she was a child, she could easily pick up money, respond to the national slogan, and be a good boy, which is what she should do. Then, every time she found the money, she opened it and found that there was still a lot left. Then, she bounced around and found Uncle Jay Cha to hand over to them. Afterwards, those uncles and aunts who found the money would give her a thank you fee, and even once, a big shot directly supported her for all the expenses of studying and living until she reached adulthood. But she was already very intelligent and gifted, graduating from a postdoctoral program at Q University at the age of 15. Afterwards, she continued to serve the country at the Academy of Sciences and finally decided to resign to retire, only to have a car accident. Suddenly return to its original form. No, it's even worse than returning to its original form. Gu Sangyu couldn't help but purse her lips. Then she looked at her body in the space, which was also a 3-year-old little girl, and sighed. At this moment, Gu Sangyu thought that her body had disappeared. So what if the beautiful woman and the sick little girl couldn't find her and cried? Then, Gu Sangyu thought to herself and tried to look outside with her consciousness, only to find that her small body was still sleeping on the Kong. So what, she's coming in now may just be conscious. Gu Sangyu instinctively breathed a sigh of relief. Later, she thought to herself, why not go out and return to her body to see if her body could come in while the beautiful woman and little doubting were still awake. Thinking about it, Gu Sangyu directly returned to her body, trying to enter the space, and found that it was really possible. Then, she immediately released her small body and threw her consciousness back into space. Afterwards, Gu Sangyu walked step by step in the space with peace of mind. She was shocked as she walked and watched. Here, I'm afraid it's some feng shui treasure land. That's great too. The well of Lingquan, gushing with water, don't ask her why. She doesn't know either, but she just knows. Seeing the Lingquan well, Gu Sangyu was moved. She thought of the various benefits of Lingquan in the novels she had read before, and couldn't wait to run over. Immediately, she scooped a handful of water with her small hand and delivered it to her mouth. Then, she noticed that her small body was even more energetic. Gu Sangyu's consciousness reached out and looked at her small body on the Kong. She found that compared to before, her small face had a blush and looked much healthier. Gu Sangyu felt a sense of joy in her heart. It seemed that even if she drank the spiritual spring water like this, it would still be useful for her body. In that case, that would be much better. With this spiritual spring water, everyone in the Gu family can improve their health, but it needs to be done step by step. Usually, she just needs to secretly mix some in the water tank. Okay, that's it. Later, Gu Sangyu sat by the edge of the Lingquan well and looked around. As she looked around, the space was endless. She noticed that these animals were surrounded by each species. For example, chickens were together, ducks were together, pigs were also together. Each species occupied a circle, and she realized that these animals seemed to ignore each other, just like the Chu River and the Han boundary, where the well water did not invade the river. This aroused Gu Sangyu's interest. She walked over and placed a chicken in the duck's line. The next second, she noticed that the chicken had disappeared from the duck's line. The chicken that was just taken away reappeared at the location of the chicken flock. Gu Sangyu's eyes widened wide, and it seemed that this world formed its own style. And now that she has this space, doesn't it mean that she is the master of this space? Thinking about it, the curvature of Gu Sangyu's mouth became even greater. Each animal here is chubby and looks like it's eating well. After walking, Gu Sangyu found that there are wolves, tigers, and so on here. Gu Sangyu was shocked. This is probably an incredible little world. And not far from these animals, there is a river with no visible boundaries, and in this river, the fish are jumping happily one by one. However, when she poked, she found that these fish were lying flat. Then, she grabbed one at a time, and Gu Sangyu was confused. The fish was so silly. Moreover, this river seems to have a distinct boundary between the Chu River and the Han River, with shrimp occupying one side and fish on the other, perhaps walking a section, along with other river delicacies. Gu Sangyu's face was filled with an excited smile. With such a space, the Gu family was determined not to starve to death, and even better. I heard that there are also many good things on the back mountain of Gujia village, so she definitely needs to go and see them. Gu Sangyu is like Lu Lao Lao observing the Grand View Garden, everything she sees is fresh. After all, this is a first-time experience, including time traveling. What kind of luck, this may only be attributed to her koi physique. Gu Sangyu left by the river, bypassed the animal's side, and then kept walking until she found a large area of extremely growing rice and wheat, which was beyond the reach of the naked eye. And this rice and wheat are also like the Chu River and Han Dynasty, with clear distinctions and neat sides, making Gu Sangyu shudder at the sight. This is really amazing. After walking further, it was a large medicinal field, while on the other side, there was a vegetable field with a clear distinction. Gu Sangyu was also a bit restless now. This golden finger was too big. Wait, she can't think that way. It's better to have her golden fingers wide open. Otherwise, let her 3-year-old body do something. If she gets caught and sold, she won't even know where to go. Gu Sangyu kept smacking her lips, surprised, very surprised. She suspected that she had stolen the home of some immortal, not even a fairy. Gu Sangyu pursed her lips, wanting to know what else was inside. Then, as she continued walking, she saw the endless fruit forest, and Gu Sangyu was already numb. This TMD is an independent small world. Modern colleagues call her coy, and she smiles. Although she admits it in her heart, it is far less shocking than it is today. She is thinking whether she gathered all the good luck in the world to obtain this space. But she thought for a moment, no, she's already dead. Maybe it's because heaven compensated her. Thinking this way, Gu Sangyu felt much better. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Space Emergence. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Space Emergence. Immediately afterwards, Gu Sangyu's eyebrows furrowed. This place was too big, and she was not easy to manage as a petty person. Gu Sangyu rubbed her little face, and while she was pondering, a little elf-like doll flapped its wings and approached her with a joyful voice. Little master, I can help you. I am the spirit of this space, and you can ask me any questions, little master. Gu Sangyu looked at the simple and lovely spirit, let go of her guard, and said, then you can introduce this place well. As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly realized that she could speak smoothly, and Gu Sangyu's eyes lit up with joy. Thinking about it, it was probably the effect of the Lingquan before, and even she noticed that her slow and leisurely brain seemed to be spinning a bit faster. Ling Hu fanned his wings around Gu Sangyu and said happily, little master, this is a personal space. I am the spirit here. Gu Sangyu's face lit up with joy, and her face turned black for an instant. You've already told me, how do you plan to manage this place? This space is so spiritual and foolish that Gu Sangyu didn't even notice it. The space spirit continued to fly around Gu Sangyu and said, little master, there's actually no need to worry about it here. There's a rule here that when all the crops mature, they will be automatically classified into several rooms not far away when the master first enters, which is automatic harvesting. Upon hearing this, Gu Sangyu's face lit up with joy, which made it much easier. Immediately after, as Gu Sangyu wanted to say something, she heard the foolish spirit continue to say, little master, now this space belongs to me. Just give me a direct idea of where I want to go. Gu Sangyu glanced at Ling and directly experimented. Sure enough, she arrived at those few houses. The space spirit followed suit and immediately flashed, saying, "Master, you see, this place is all divided into different categories. Each room corresponds to one thing. For example, medicine corresponds to this one. The pharmacy is written on the door sign, and the owner can go in and take a look." Gu Sangyu blinked her eyes, pushed the door open, and found that there were a wide variety of medicines inside, with modern medicines on one side and ancient medicines on the other. Gu Sangyu secretly licked her tongue, which was too intelligent. Looking at Gu Sangyu's surprised expression, Space Spirit fluttered its wings and pointed in the direction of the other rooms. "Little master, the other rooms are the same." Gu Sangyu suppressed her surprise and looked over one by one. Sure enough, in the grain room, rice, wheat, rice, flour, as well as some beans and vegetables were all sorted well. It seems that such a small place actually holds so many things. The fruit room next to it is naturally filled with various types of fruits, while the study room next to it covers books from ancient and modern times, both domestic and foreign. Gu Sangyu was even more surprised. Moreover, in addition to these rooms, there is also a weapons depot, which categorizes various weapons, and on the other side, various agricultural tools can also be found here. She didn't expect that in ancient times, she could also see what modern times have. There was also a ready-to-wear room with various clothes inside. After seeing a lot, Gu Sangyu arrived at the last room. It was written on it, "Modern Supplies." Gu Sangyu was immediately shocked. She thought it was already shocking enough just now, but she didn't expect that the last one would be directly modern supplies. Gu Sangyu pushed the door in and found that it was a super large supermarket with everything. It also covers everything. Moreover, there are even electronic products, which Gu Sangyu did not expect. However, she cannot take any of these things out unless she opens up another place for construction. From this, there was an inexhaustible supply of things in this space. Looking at everything else, Gu Sangyu realized that it was really good, it was incredibly good. Xiaoyubao's writing is still familiar with the simplified characters she is familiar with, while she is also familiar with other characters. However, in the end, there are no simplified characters that are more convenient for her. The only difference is that writing here is done with a brush. She can say that she is a big shot, but the brush handwriting is very lackluster. Of course, there may be other lacklusters, but she will admit it, not really. Gu Sangyu felt guilty and touched her nose, but she couldn't help it. She really had no talent for writing with a brush. Gu Sangyu twitched her nose and pursed her mouth tightly. Since there is everything in this space, now that the conditions are good, let the brothers learn. It has been said that the more you learn, the less ignorant you will appear. This dynasty, this country, Gu Sangyu is not familiar with. After she recovers, she needs to check the situation. If she recovers, then she should live here well. If it's not good, with her space, wherever she goes, she doesn't have to worry about a family without food. In fact, the most ideal life is seclusion, but just because she thinks so doesn't mean her parents and brothers think so. Well, settling down at home is like having nothing. I don't want so much for now. Since there is space here, she won't worry so much anymore. It's always her own thing. After swaying, Gu Sangyu's consciousness was also a bit tired. Gu Sangyu sat by the Lingquan well and looked outside through her consciousness, only to find that Xiao Doubting's third brother and the beautiful woman had not yet woken up. Gu Sangyu breathed a sigh of relief. She was hungry, but since her body had been hungry for too long, she couldn't eat too much directly. Otherwise, she would suffer from stomach pain, which is equivalent to binge eating. Gu Sangyu suddenly remembered the milk powder she saw in the modern supplies room. Infant milk powder is very nutritious, and she can come and drink it. There's no hot water. Inspired by what the owner was thinking, he quickly flew over and said, "Master, I can make a big pot here and boil water for the owner." Gu Sangyu's eyes lit up with joy. This foolish spatial spirit still had its purpose. Not bad, Gu Sangyu nodded and agreed, okay, you boil water and use the water from the Lingquan well. Quickly, Gu Sangyu took out several baby bottles from inside and then brought out a can of milk powder. When Gu Sangyu came out, the space spirit had already boiled water, and she asked the space spirit to bring out several bottles. Then remind Space Ling to prepare and categorize the milk used by the third brother and her own milk, and always fill them up. After all, she will have to drink these milk powders for a long time. Moreover, milk mixed with Lingquan water is also better for the body. Moreover, not only did she have to drink it, but her three brothers, Xiaoyubao, also had to drink it. The weak body she was born with, even if it cannot be eradicated, can still be much stronger. When she is older, she can cure the three brothers. After all, she needs to cooperate with acupuncture and moxibustion. She is too young to do these things. Upon receiving the order from the young master, Space Spirit was extremely happy and flew around Gu Sangyu with a bumpy butt. She patted her small chest and said, "Master, don't worry, I will definitely take care of the space. Don't worry, I'll take care of these small things." Gu Sangyu nodded her little head and replied, "Okay, it's up to you." After arranging the matter, Gu Sangyu thought that her current food was in place, so her family also had to be arranged. Moreover, she could drink milk secretly, just like drinking Lingquan water. So, there must be something to eat openly. Taking advantage of the fact that she can speak and think normally in the space now, let's make some arrangements for now. I can speak normally in space now, but it doesn't mean that the small body with a broken gong pot won't hold me back after going out. After returning to that small body, there should still be some speaking problems, but normal walking movements are definitely not a problem, otherwise, she would have to suspect that the Lingquan is fake. Lingquan. Don't wrongly accuse me, of course I am true. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. The Impoverished Gu Family. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. The Impoverished Gu Family. The little girl's eyes rolled around, and that's what she did. With just one consciousness, it's not a problem. She's full, so her loving family also needs to have food to eat. Following the location of the kitchen in my memory, in the next moment, 20 more eggs appeared in the basket under the cutting board. Then, she returned to her own body, and then a bottle appeared next to her. Gu Sangyu sat up, and then her eyes lit up with joy. She sat up, it was really good, and now she felt full of energy. Now, can she try walking? Gu Sangyu's smiling face was stiffened by the noise coming from her stomach. Then, the little girl secretly glanced at the beautiful lady and the three brothers, Xiaoyubao, and breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, she didn't wake them up. Gu Sangyu looked at the beautiful woman and her three brothers, Xiaoyubao, and quickly finished drinking the milk. She belched heavily and placed the bottle in the space. Afterwards, the little girl squinted her eyes and rubbed her belly with satisfaction, feeling really comfortable. And now, Gu Sangyu has also realized that everything in the space is the freshest, it's really good. However, time flows faster in space, but things are not bad. Gu Sangyu looked at the sleeping beauty and the three brothers, Xiaoyubao, and carefully climbed around them to the edge of the Kong. But as soon as she arrived at the Kong, Gu Sangyu was dumbfounded. When she lay on the Kong, she didn't feel it. It was too unfriendly to her 3-year-old body. When she reached the Kong, it was too tall. Gu Sangyu suddenly felt like crying without tears. She bit her little hand eagerly, looking left and right. There was no one to help her now. The little girl gritted her teeth and slowly moved her body to the edge of the Kong. She found the side with shoes and began to hang her feet on her arm and tiptoe to the ground. For a long time, Gu Sangyu was almost unable to hold on anymore, and finally probed the floor before firmly putting herself down. Gu Sangyu quickly wiped away the sweat that had accumulated on her forehead, but the next second she happily curved her lips. Yesterday, I was half dead lying on the Kong. Today, I can get out of bed on my own. It's great. Thank you for Lingquan water. Gu Sangyu breathed a small sigh of relief, tiptoed to watch the three brothers sleeping next to the beautiful woman, and gently patted her chest. Fortunately, she didn't wake them up. The little girl walked out of the room step by step, turning back 3 times and walking lightly. Facing the big sun outside, she smiled happily. Later, Gu Sangyu remembered the eggs she had placed in the basket under the kitchen chopping board and ran over with a thud. The little body squatted down and looked at the eggs in the basket, counting them one by one, no more, no less, exactly 20. Gu Sangyu thought to herself, even if the family eats these 20 eggs, they won't last long. Then, Xiao Sangyu turned and looked at the things in the kitchen. At first glance, she saw the grain tank of the small jar placed in the upper right corner of the cutting board. Gu Sangyu walked over and lifted the lid of the jar. Her clear and transparent big eyes were complicated, only a few grains of rice at the bottom of the jar, still the kind of rice residue. This is not enough to eat at all. Looking at the slightly larger jar next to the rice jar, the little girl pursed her lips tightly and frowned. She sighed and walked over, revealing only a thin layer of gray flour at the bottom of the jar. The bottom of the jar was completely visible, with a small amount of flour mixed with more than half of the bran. This gray flour may have been saved by our family through frugality, but just thinking about it, we know that refined flour is so precious that it is impossible for our family to afford it. Gu Sangyu sighed and turned her head to look at the water tank not far away. Only the tank was full, and the rest was fine. The most likely thing is probably the 20 eggs that I took out of space and placed in the small basket under the chopping board. Sigh. Gu Sangyu looked at the 2 grain tanks on the chopping board, pursed her lips, lowered her head to look at her small and thin hands, feeling extremely helpless. If she were a little bigger, she would be able to clear the contents of these 2 tanks. Now it's impossible, that's all. Xiao Sangyu lowered her mouth and placed her hand above the rice jar. The next second, the jar was filled with crystal clear and fair grains of rice. The only thing that Gu Sangyu was dissatisfied with about this jar was the miscellaneous grains underneath. Then, Xiao Sangyu placed her hand on the mouth of the noodle jar, and soon, the white and thin white noodles filled the entire noodle jar. After seeing that both cylinders were full, Gu Sangyu's face finally showed a smile. After sealing the 2 jars carefully, Xiaoyubao walked to the edge of the water tank and poured Lingquan water into it, then patted her hands. Although the kitchen looks dilapidated, it is tidy and not as monotonous anymore. There is rice, noodles, and eggs, and now there are only vegetables missing. However, there are already a lot of things to take out now. Let's call my brother to the mountain later and find a way to take them. Gu Sangyu thought that since she came here, she must need to develop well in the future, and there must be many people guarding the house. It is said that the poor mountains and rivers lead to troublemakers, and she does not understand the villagers here. Previously, Xiao Gu Sangyu was a fool. Through the malicious style of the old lady, she did not trust people who were not in the same family, nor did she trust other people in the village. Moreover, in the current situation of Gu's family, there was no kind-hearted villager to help, and it would be better not to fall into trouble. Of course, in ancient rural households, life was not easy for each family. Helping others was a duty, and not helping was a duty. She also understood. Furthermore, in such a situation, they will develop in the future. If Gu's father is not well and his mother cannot see him, even if his eldest brother comes back, there will only be a few children at home, which cannot take good care of the family. Gu Sangyu thought for a moment and realized that this was quite a troublesome matter. The adults in her family have not yet recovered, so she can only think more. Even if she is only 3 years old, there are many things she can do. Xiaoyubao couldn't help but pursed her lips. Later on, it developed. I was not afraid of thieves stealing, but I was afraid of thieves thinking about it. Gu Sangyu thought, how about raising a dog? But it's also a bit monotonous. How about raising some large ones? Gu Sangyu's skinny little face had a pair of round peach blossom eyes that shone brightly. With a blink of an eye, Gu Sangyu had an idea. There were large animals in the space, which happened to be used to guard the house. She needs to find a way to take a clear path. She has already figured it out, a leopard, a wolf, and a tiger. At that time, when she went to the mountains, it was not her world yet. She would hold and raise one cub at a time, and then the bright curve on Xiaoyubao's face grew larger and larger. After making a decision, she waited for the next opportunity. After regaining her senses, Gu Sangyu realized that she had been out for so long and had not yet tried to pronounce and speak. Whether she could articulate her words clearly or not was still a question. What are you saying? Never mind, let's ask my brother to give it a try first. The little girl opened her mouth and tried to say, yes. Yes. As soon as she left, Gu Sangyu's small face turned black. She didn't believe the situation anymore, she couldn't tame her tongue. In modern times, so many children have clear tongues when they are 2 years old. As for her, this little body is already 3 years old, and there is still a hurdle she cannot overcome as a big shot. Then, half an hour later, Gu Sangyu finally tamed her tongue and could no longer knot her teeth. She just said, "What's difficult about this?" After drinking the Lingquan water, who else can do it through this practice? Now, the body of the broken gong pot is not as broken as before, and the brain is turning slowly, but it is not that slow either. For Mr. Gu, he is already satisfied. After all, compared to lying on the Kong the day before and not being able to speak clearly, it's much better now. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Mixing Soup. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Mixing Soup. Gu Sangyu looked at the sun outside and didn't know what time it was. In ancient times, this was the most annoying thing. The little girl walked to the kitchen door and couldn't hear anyone else getting up. She turned around and looked at the stove half a head taller than her. Her small mouth was tightly pursed, and her small body was so heavy that she couldn't even help her family cook a meal. Gu Sangyu searched around, not to mention the bench, but couldn't find any tree stumps or anything else. Forget it, let's flip through the space. Gu Sangyu entered the space and found Ling boiling water by the Lingquan well. She said, "Ling, can you help me get a stool out? I need to go out and cook." It's really great that both the body and consciousness can express the feeling clearly now. Ling put down the tools in his hand and flew over with a whoosh, blinking his watery and clear eyes. His 2 small hands were placed in front of him, and his small body twisted. "Master, is Ling the name my master gave me? It sounds so beautiful." Gu Sangyu was taken aback at the words and looked up and down at the foolish spirit. It was not as it had previously said it was a spirit in space that she called it. Sure enough, it's foolish, but Ling is indeed like a name. Looking at the small appearance that the space spirit is looking forward to, he nodded and said, Zero is your name, not the spirit of the space spirit, it's Rain Ling Zero." Then, the little elf flew around Gu Sangyu several times and exclaimed happily, "Thank you for giving me the name, master. I'm so happy. I'll go get a chair for my master now." Gu Sangyu shook her head and waited quietly for Zero to bring her a chair. As she turned around, Zero had already come out. Gu Sangyu took the stool in Zero's hand, which was dozens of times larger than it, and said in a milky voice, "Thank you, Zero. I will come to see you again in the future." Zero flew up to Gu Sangyu, holding her face in 2 small hands and smiling sweetly, saying, "It's Zero's blessing to be able to help the master. Zero will definitely be the best companion for the master." Gu Sangyu's eyebrows and eyes curved as she said, Go ahead and get busy." The next second, Gu Sangyu appeared along with the stool. With the stool, Xiao Sangyu placed it next to the stove. Then, the little girl repeatedly transported the water from the water tank to the stove and stood on the stool, pouring the water into the pot in the middle of the stove. She was young and couldn't transport much water at once. Gu Sangyu went back and forth several times, and finally filled the pot almost. The little girl used some strength to push the slightly large lid of the pot bit by bit and cover it. Then, Gu Sangyu jumped off the chair and started looking for the bowl. After searching around, she found several bowls in a basket covered with cloth, all with notches, some all with notches, and even cut her mouth to the edge of her mouth. Gu Sangyu's thin and small face stiffened, and she took out the bowl from the basket and placed it next to it. This bowl was useless at all. Gu Sangyu pursed her lips tightly, and the next second, 10 white hexagonal 6.5-inch porcelain bowls appeared in front of her. There were also 2 cartoon blue fish entwined around the neck on the bowl wall. Since the bowl needs to be replaced, let's take the chopsticks again. Besides, she searched around but didn't see any chopsticks. Perhaps it was because our family was poor and had nothing to eat that we didn't have chopsticks. She only saw a spoon yesterday, which was a small wooden spoon. Now in this kitchen, she hasn't seen it either. Later, Gu Sangyu took 10 pairs of black and gold chopsticks, with black bodies and gold-plated edges wrapped around the top of the chopsticks, with the words "Fu" written on them. Simple yet elegant. At the same time, Gu Sangyu also took out 5 spoons. The handle of the spoons was black and wrapped around like a gourd, with a silver-white stainless steel spoon in front. After cleaning all 10 bowls, 10 pairs of chopsticks, and 5 spoons, Gu Sangyu carefully placed 1 bowl and 1 pair of chopsticks on the chopping board. Then, she put the chopsticks and spoons, along with the remaining 9 bowls, back into the basket and covered it with a cloth. Gu Sangyu walked to the edge of the chopping board and picked up the bowl with both hands. She placed it next to the noodle jar and scooped it up 3 times with a small cup that scooped flour. After covering the cylinder head, she brought the bowl with flour to the middle of the chopping board with both hands. Then, she scooped up a water spoon from the edge of the water jar and scooped it up half. She walked to the edge of the chopping board and poured in water step by step, stirring the flour until it was stirred open. Mixing soup is the simplest way. Suddenly, Gu Sangyu's stirring hand stopped. In the kitchen, there was a shortage of ingredients, not even chopsticks, so there must be no seasoning. Gu Sangyu sighed again and took out a small bag of salt and a small bucket of vinegar from the space and placed them on the cutting board. It's true that without anything, a clever woman cannot cook without rice. Now that we have the most important salt and vinegar, we can also make this mixed soup. In no time, a bowl of thick noodle soup was stirred up, and Gu Sangyu took out 3 eggs from under the chopping board, intending to beat them in later. She is young and now she has the strength. Otherwise, like yesterday, she would be afraid of falling if she couldn't hold it steady. Then, Gu Sangyu glanced at the things prepared on the chopping board and smiled, then turned around and walked to the stove, dumbfounded. This is an earthen stove, She has never used an earthen stove, she doesn't know how to make a fire. Gu Sangyu gritted her teeth, pinched a handful of hay piled up next to the stove, and stuffed it into the stove. After searching for something to light, Gu Sangyu couldn't find anything and couldn't help but take a lighter out of the space. Quickly, the hay caught fire, and Gu Sangyu stuffed some small dead branches into the stove. She blew with her small mouth, but found it to be ineffective and choked. She kept coughing. The little girl was helpless and looked around, only to find a worn-out fan. It's said to be dilapidated, some have agreed, and the fan is only half a day left, but fortunately it can be used to fan the wind. In no time, the fire started. Then, Gu Sangyu wanted to stuff a larger piece of wood into the stove. She happily took the wood and wanted to lift it, only to find that her hands were too small to hold with one hand, so she could only hold it with both hands together. Gu Sangyu's face bulged. This was already the first time this little body had dragged her back. She had to grow taller, she had to grow taller. It seems that her previous decision to drink milk was correct. Now she drinks milk powder, and in the future she will drink milk when she is older. Gu Sangyu bulged her small face and big eyes, with a bright light shining in them. She held a piece of wood with both hands and stuffed it into the stove. Then, Gu Sangyu realized that there was still another one of this size in the stove, so she continued to hold one with both hands and put it into the stove. After putting it in, Gu Sangyu pinched the wheezing fan with both hands, and the fire came up. The little girl closed the stove door tightly. Watching the fire burning so vigorously through the small opening of the stove door, Xiaoyubao's white and tender face turned black and white one by one due to the fire. Although her face turned into a little flower cat, her bright eyes were particularly clear against the small flames. The little girl's face was dirty, but her little expression was lively and beautiful. She praised herself softly, "Look, the fire is burning. It's not that simple. It's a small joke, Gu Sangyu, you're really amazing." After speaking, Gu Sangyu also smiled awkwardly. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Yubao Can't Be Found. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Yubao can't be found. Quickly, the water boiled, and Xiaoyubao clattered the dough from the chopping board and placed it in a position next to the stove where she could put bowls. As soon as she stood on the stool, Gu Sangyu was stunned. She had previously dragged the lid of the pot over and covered it, but the water had not boiled and there was no steam. Now that the steam came up, she moved it little by little, afraid of being burned by the steam. Gu Sangyu furrowed her brows tightly, and it took her a long time to find an angle. Finally, the little girl's face stretched out. Gu Sangyu gradually lifted the lid of the pot, stirred up the batter that had sunk to the bottom of the bowl with chopsticks, and poured it into the boiling water pot with both hands. Then, rinsed the batter in the bowl with floating water, leaving only the edges of the bowl sticky and the rest clean. Looking at the bowl, Gu Sangyu smiled. The next second, Gu Sangyu saw that the pot had not yet stirred, so she hurriedly took a large wooden spoon from the cutting board and started stirring with both hands holding the handle. It's also okay, there's enough fire on the stove, and now the soup is rolling around with a gurgling sound. After stirring it several times, looking at the thick soup, Gu Sangyu's dirty little face didn't show any signs of decadence. On the contrary, a bright smile appeared on her small face. Smelling the aroma of mixed soup in the pot, Gu Sangyu quickly took the 3 eggs from the chopping board and knocked a hole in each egg, one by one, beating them into the mixed soup. Egg flour mixed with soup, 3 eggs were beaten in, and Gu Sangyu blinked and stirred with bright eyes. She took salt and vinegar from the chopping board again, poured some in, and the white soup was not as white as before. It was dyed with a slight color of vinegar. Looking at the mixed egg white soup, Gu Sangyu proudly straightened her chest. Just as Gu Sangyu was about to get off the stool to get a bowl, she suddenly heard the crying of her third brother Gu Sangshu. Ancient houses were not soundproof, so Gu Sangyu heard Gu Sangshu cry and shout, "Mother, Yubao is missing, Mother, Yubao cannot be found. What should we do?" After hearing her youngest son's words, Tan Yue's heart also thumped, and tears welled up in her dark, misty eyes. The thin and tender hand, which could reveal blue blood vessels, kept touching the corners of the Kong and choked up, saying, "Yubao, Yubao, don't scare your mother. Come out quickly, Yubao, Yubao, where are you?" Gu's father, who lived in the adjacent side room, heard his wife's crying and his youngest son's cries. He became anxious and his bearded face flashed with a hint of bitterness. He is now a useless person, what can he do? Gu's father felt remorseful as he knocked on his broken leg, his rough and thin hands covering his face. Tears streamed down his fingers, silently streaming down his face. The cries and cries shattered Gu Sangyu's heart, turning her into a little flower cat with a pair of bright big eyes soaked in water. Just as Gu Sangyu was about to hastily step down from the stool, at the same time, his second brother, who was selling wild vegetables at the morning market, returned. He was lucky today and sold more quickly. Gu Sangyu's face was filled with joy, and he collapsed when he heard his mother and younger brother crying loudly. After hearing what his mother and younger brother were saying clearly, Gu Sangyu became anxious and rushed inside. At this moment, Gu Sangyu also ran out of the kitchen, crying as she ran. Mother, mother, where is Yubao? Yubao is there, and Yubao is not missing. Gu Sangyu's running feet suddenly stopped and stopped Xiaoyubao, picking him up. Gu Sangyu looked at the anxious expression in the eyes of his second brother with tearful eyes, and hugged his neck, saying, "Second brother, hurry up and take Yubao inside. Mother is crying." Gu Sangyu looked at Xiaoyubao's kitten-like face, and a hint of bitterness flashed in his eyes as he thought that Xiaoyubao had just come out of the kitchen. Xiaoyubao was hungry and went to the kitchen to find something to eat, but there was nothing at home. His sister, his daughter. Gu's father heard that Xiaoyubao had not been lost, and the string he lifted in his heart suddenly loosened, crying and laughing. Gu Sangyu was immersed in pain, holding Xiaoyubao tightly and tightly. At this moment, Gu Sangyu couldn't care anymore. Her beautiful mother's body was already delicate and weak, and now her body was even worse. Gu Sangyu struggled a few times in the arms of her second brother, only then did she recall Sangyu's thoughts. Gu Sangyu looked at his sister's anxious expression and didn't care about anything else. He quickly strode forward and pushed open the door, shouting, "Mother, Yubao is here, Yubao hasn't been lost." Gu Sangyu quickly placed Gu Sangyu in front of her mother, and the little girl felt guilty as she watched her beautiful mother cry uncontrollably. Why didn't she respond to the cry of the beautiful woman just now? Gu Sangyu despised herself very much in her heart. But her brain didn't react. At this moment, Gu Sangyu only wanted to comfort her beautiful mother. She quickly leaned over and touched her face with her small hand, crying and saying, "Beautiful mother, don't cry. Yubao is here, Yubao hasn't been lost. Yubao has gone to the kitchen, and Yubao is cooking delicious food." Yubao wanted to eat with her, but Yubao didn't mean to. As she spoke, Gu Sangyu let out a loud cry, and Yue felt another pain upon hearing her youngest daughter's words. She felt both guilty for the children and grateful that she had not lost her daughter. Yue stroked her little daughter's head, silently shedding tears as she touched her and said, "Yubao, be good." Gu Sangyu watched as Xiaoyubao was embraced by his mother and silently shed tears. Gu Sangyu looked at her third brother's swollen eyes as he cried, and quickly comforted her mother, "Third brother, don't cry. Yubao hasn't been lost, don't be afraid." Upon hearing Xiaoyubao's comfort, Gu Sangyu nodded like a chicken pecking at rice. Gu Sangyu had been listening to the conversation between his mother and sister. When he heard Yubao go to the kitchen and say to cook, Gu Sangyu deeply blamed himself for being useless. There is nothing at home, his sister. It's him who is not good and lacks ability. Gu Sangyu finally calmed the beautiful lady and quickly remembered that her egg blossom soup was still in the pot. Gu Sangyu became anxious and quickly thumped in Yue's arms. The little girl blinked her clear and bright big eyes and said, "Miss Beauty, Yubao has made a meal. Let's go eat." Yue was taken aback for a moment, thinking that her youngest daughter was talking nonsense. The beautiful woman gently caressed Yubao's head, with a hint of bitterness in her soft voice. "Yubao, be good, is Yubao hungry? Let the second brother prepare brown rice paste for you, okay?" Upon hearing this, Gu Sangyu's small face collapsed and she said, "Madam Beauty, I didn't lie. Yubao really cooked the meal. If you don't believe it, you can let your second brother go see it. Yubao really didn't lie." Gu Sangyu didn't want to make his sister unhappy. He smiled with red eyes and said, "Yubao said that, then I'll go take a look." Yue waved her hand helplessly and said, "Lure, go ahead." Gu Sangyu kept tightly grasping Yubao's hand on the side, afraid that if one didn't pay attention, his sister would be gone again. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Questioning Gu Sangyu. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Questioning Gu Sangyu. Speaking of Gu Sangyu, as soon as he arrived at the kitchen, he was stunned. The first thing that caught his eye was the square wooden stool, followed by the white hexagonal bowl on the stove, and finally, the large pot that was opened was emitting white air one by one. Gu Sangyu suddenly dared not step forward, afraid that what his Yubao was saying was true. Gu Sangyu closed his eyes, opened them, and found the same scene. Gu Sangyu calmed down and walked heavily to the pot. Gu Sangyu looked at the white soup with egg blossoms in the pot, his slender and beautiful mouth pursed into a straight line. As he watched, his eyes turned red again. How long has it been since they smelled the aroma of the rice, but now this aroma was brought by his 3-year-old sister. Gu Sangyu looked at this scene and suddenly realized something was wrong. There was nothing at home, so where did all this come from? And, she's only 3 years old, how did she cook this rice? Gu Sangyu immediately turned cold with a small face and returned to the room. When Gu Sangyu saw his second brother come back, he immediately crawled out of the arms of the beautiful woman. His small chest stood up and he looked at his second brother with great pride, saying, "Second brother, is Yubao very powerful? You can testify to Yubao that Yubao really didn't lie." Gu Sangyu stood for a long, long time, his throat itchy, wanting to speak but unable to speak. Gu Sangyu noticed that her second brother was silent, and her proud little face collapsed. Her small mouth pursed tightly, feeling that the atmosphere was a bit off. Yue couldn't see it, but she could also feel that Luer's emotions were not right. Although she couldn't see it in her beautiful eyes, she also became anxious and quickly asked, "Luer, what's wrong?" "But what's wrong?" Gu Sangyu remained silent, his small mouth pursed tightly, and he looked nervously at his second brother. Gu Sangyu closed her eyes deeply and didn't answer her mother's words. She turned to look at Gu Sangyu and asked in a deep voice, "Where did the cooking at home come from? Also, there are no ingredients at home, let alone the eggs. I don't want to doubt you, but you are really suspicious. Yesterday, when you woke up, you spoke. Today, when you woke up, not only can you speak, but you can also run and call and cook. Tell me, is this something that a 3-year-old child can do?" Gu Sangyu's heart was heavy with the heavy questioning. The little girl opened her mouth, but she couldn't explain. Just keep your head down and not speak. She just wants to help her family live better. She risks being caught as a monster to live a better life, but she really has no ill intentions. She doesn't understand where Gu Sangyu went before. She woke up from a car accident here, what can she do? The more she thought about it, the more aggrieved she became. The little girl pouted and began to shed tears without saying a word. Gu Sangyu stared blankly at the scene before him. He was also young, and he subconsciously felt that Yubao was his sister. However, his brother's words made sense to him. What should he do? Gu Sangyu's round and round big eyes swept over a complex scene. Yue was taken aback by the meaning of her son's words and reacted accordingly. Even if she scolded, she was gentle and said, "Luer, how can you doubt your sister? She is your sister. My mother told you a sentence, and you knew why she was so confident. Your elder brother also knew this sentence. At that time, you and Shuer were still young, so I'm afraid you don't remember. At that time, Yubao was just 100 days old, and our family was happy. When we went to the town market, we met a wandering Taoist. He stopped us before and said, since we met, it was fate. This girl has a fate with the old Taoist, so the old Taoist will give you a message. The soul of the doll was born. Xiao, once your soul returns, you will fully display your face. Although the female treasure is small and full of blessings, it can soar to the sky and be held by your fingers now, Luer, you understand. Gu's father heard everything clearly in the side room, and his heart was also in a daze. Yes, there was such a thing. Upon hearing this, Gu Sangyu also felt a moment of confusion. Not only did Gu Sangyu feel stunned, but Gu Sangyu herself also became stunned. In modern times, when she was shopping and happily drinking milk tea, she didn't pay much attention to this sentence. She walked into an alley and also met a wandering Taoist. As she passed by, she left a sentence that was similar to what he said. She also remembered what he said. The soul cultivator in a different world, at the age of 18, looked back at the door and returned home at the age of 3, which made the Gu family laugh all over the door. She didn't take this sentence seriously at the time, but when Gu Sangyu took it out of her mind, she realized that it was complimentary to what her mother had said. No wonder she happened to be on her 18th birthday that day, so she had a car accident and came here. So, she is really a child of her family. In modern times, she has no family, and she thought it was her parents who despised her as a girl and didn't want her. So, with her own luck and hard work, she became a respected figure. I just want her parents to take a look at her, Gu Sangyu. Without them, life would be better. But now tell her that she is actually the person here, with a father, a mother, and 3 older brothers. But after realizing that she was the fool Gu Sangyu became even sadder. She cooked the meal, and her brother still suspected her. Although he didn't say it explicitly, the meaning of that was that he was some lonely ghost or even some monster occupying his sister's body. Thinking of this, Gu Sangyu's tears streamed down her face. If her second brother didn't coax her, she would be fine. Although Gu Sangyu couldn't understand what his mother was saying, looking at his second brother's stunned expression, he knew that Yubao was indeed his sister. Gu Sangyu was happy because he liked his sister very much. Gu Sanglu was stunned for a long time and couldn't come to his senses. It took him a long time to hold back a sentence from his throat. Mom, what you said is true. Tan Yue's face darkened and she said, of course it's true. This is absolutely true, can there be any falsehoods? But, you can rot this secret into my stomach. If anyone asks about it in the future, they will say that Yubao has a fever, slept for a day and a night, and slept well. Do you hear me? Gu Sanglu nodded in a daze. Gu Sangshu also nodded obediently, he will protect his sister well. Gu Sanglu looked at Xiaoyubao with complex eyes as he lowered his head and tears kept popping down. When he didn't know that Xiaoyubao was his sister, he could ask in a deep voice. But after learning that this little guy was indeed his sister, Gu Sangliu's heart began to ache. Gu Sangliu's mouth was tingling, and he cautiously reached out his hand to hug Xiaoyubao, but he was also afraid that Xiaoyubao would dislike him. He is really a failure in his character. Gu Sangyu caught a glimpse of second brother's hand reaching out to hug but not daring to do so. She sighed inwardly and lifted her head, holding on to second brother's hand fiercely. She exclaimed angrily, second brother, you wronged Yubao, don't you even plan to apologize to Yubao? As long as you apologize to Yubao, Yubao will still forgive you with his magnanimity. End of this chapter.